Hey, everybody. Huge news for the Walker household, Zane. I didn't even get to tell you this, buddy, but Starlink is coming to the Walker household. So my internet speed, I won't be buffering on you, all the time. So I feel like healthcare tech is going to take a whole notch up here for this. I've missed Zane. And
Well,
speaking of taking a notch up here, Zane and I are going to talk about user and patient interviews and really start from the very beginning. You got an idea, you think it could be good, you ask your brother, you ask your mom, you ask your best friend from college, and they all say it's a good idea. Before you put the $1 million of your own hard earned money into it, first give it to Zane and I. But second, maybe listen to this little topic on user interviews. We'll talk to you in just a sec. What's up, brother? I've missed you.
I know, man. You ditched me the other day with hanging out with cool folks in Dallas. I see.
No, never. I mean, they were cool folks in Dallas, and it's always good to take a couple trips. I got to spend some time with my wife, which is always wonderful. But the I am building this product guy is one that I always miss for sure. And so I was really excited. Last week we talked about, hey, what are we going to do? Oh yeah, last week is when I went to the to WSU, when I went over there to meet with those folks too. That's why I've been missing it so much. 2 weeks in a row. We can't do this again. But the one thing that I know that you and I were both talking about a while back is like company creation. Like, how do you start, these individual companies? You and I have both been in that juncture in various roles with different companies or our own companies. And one big piece that can be a pain is we think we've got a good idea, Zane. And so we think, therefore we are.
Exactly. If you build it, they will come. That's right.
Or
does that only work for baseball fields in the middle of cornfields?
I think it does. I think it only works for those baseball fields, and you have to have like certain actors inside of the roles. But speaking of baseball and actors, what things have you done that you've hit something, a foul ball, doing exactly what we just said, trying to say, I've got a really good idea, I'm going to launch it, and missed what we're going to talk about next in user interviews?
The biggest thing is assuming that other people hate this problem or want to fix this problem as much as you do. I think one issue that comes up a lot is, especially in healthcare, because it's such a personal matter, you go through an issue, you have either your loved one or you personally go through an issue, and you're like, well, this is a big issue. If I'm going through it, everyone else is going through it, right? And I want to fix this problem. Great. That's a good place to start. I think passion is a good place to start. But to go from I want to fix this problem to launching, oh, my product is launching tomorrow, there should be a lot of people you need to talk to in the middle of that. And I think that, and hey, I'm guilty of it too. 100%. I've done that before where I just said, hey, this is a problem that I want to solve. I talked to myself and one other person who just mimicked exactly what I was at. So it's definitely, it's like I said, this is a mistake I think literally everyone makes.
Yeah, I think they do. And you can make the mistake in really interesting ways, Zane, that I think I read. I'm an Eric Bricker fan. I mean, he's just got a really good presentation style for me, and he talks about nerdy stuff that I love. And so I remember him talking about a company called Nava Health, and it was bought out by Optum. Anyway, the one thing that he really breaks down is, here are the questions you need to ask, not just, is this a problem you need to solve, but is it worth solving? Like, is it going to actually generate revenue, right, in general? And can you reach the individuals it has to be solved for? And can you measure what you're solving for? So all of those elements, kind of being put in place are not only questions that you need to ask, on an interview basis of individuals, but also some additional research that needs to be done for that solution validation. Like, do you actually have those pillars built in to go from, this is a good idea, great. This is a good idea and people want it, wonderful. This is an idea, people want it and people will pay for it, fantastic. This is an idea, people want it, people will pay for it, and I can measure the impact I'm making. Now you got something that you can actually work with.
Yeah, and a lot of times you'll get from people will want it, and you want it. It's a good idea. People will want it, and then people just assume because they want it, they'll pay for it, and they skip that part, right? Like and then another thing that happens is there's this great book I talk about it a lot. I think it's mentioned in a bunch of different posts of mine and podcasts. It's called The Mom Test. The reason why I like it so much is because it's super short, super simple. Everyone should read it at all time. I mean, anytime, because what it goes down the road of is how do you validate your solution? So he talks about the mom test being, your mom's always going to be nice to you if she knows that you're building something, or she's going to encourage you because she's your mother, right? Most mothers, at least. But so like if you come up to somebody, be like, hey, I'm creating this product, what do you think? Already people are going to be like, okay, I don't want to hurt Zain's feelings. Even if they might not agree with it or whatever, they're going to be like, oh yeah, that's great, I love it, whatever, right? What this book goes into is ask people for their experiences, because people will not lie about their experiences, right? So the questions you can ask is, is this, have you experienced this problem before? Yes, no. How often do you experience this problem? Have you looked in the past to solve this problem? Okay, if you have looked in the past to solve this problem, how much are you currently paying or are looking to pay for this problem, right? And if somebody solves this, so you can kind of get so like with those questions, none of those questions are saying I'm building this product. You're just asking them with their own experiences. So if they say, yeah, we've experienced this problem. Yeah, we deal with it once a year, but you know what? We have a couple of people. It's a nuisance, but it's not the end of the world. For right there. And if like 4 or 5, 6 people are telling you the same thing, okay, it might be a great idea, but you're probably not going to sell it. But if you get a thing like, oh man, we deal with this on a daily basis, weekly basis, and we've been searching for solutions. We bought a couple of solutions that just don't work because they don't do this, and this. Then you might be onto something, right?
Right.
And that's and again, you're not telling them this whole time that you're building this product.
And I think that's important not to bias them. One interesting thing that you talk about, the would your mom analogy, like interviewing your mom, not a great idea because she's going to see your face and she either loves you or, maybe she looks at you and goes, that rascal, I want to give him a piece of my mind. I'm not sure. But when it comes to that, you also can't bias against your own thinking when you're making different decisions about the product. For example, like me, Zain, you and I both know this about each other, which is really funny. Like if we can find something for free or for really, really dirt cheap, we're going to go with that one and try to build it and make it. There's other people who are like, I'm not going to pay for the time. Like I want a solution to work now. And so not biasing those individuals is important. But next subject to kind of jump into is we've already looked at like, here's how you need to walk through asking opinions of multiple individuals. When we say multiple, I think you've got to get into at least 25 individuals, 25 plus individuals that aren't biased, that you can get their opinions from. Now you've had a decent pooling of folks that you can actually get some opinions and some variety of opinions around a particular solution. And after you've got that, the next piece, if you've decided with some validation that I'm going to build this or I'm going to make it a reality, is really a drawing board experience, right, Zain? You go from this is going to be real to this time I'm going to make it. And so it's the design phase. Any elements that you've done previously, Zain, like with your current jobs or jobs in the past, of designing that solution and going, before I actually run to the dev team, before I go to the marketing and sales team about all things we're going to break down and push out there, let me just put it up and make sure that people are actually going to say, this is something that I think is appealing and usable. Have you done that process, buddy?
Yeah. There's this quote for some reason has been going around recently, at least in my feeds. It's about Steve Jobs. And he says, when you're building a product, always start with the user experience and work your way backwards. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're doing design, you want to start with the user experience first. Best design, and this is another quote by, I can't remember his name, but it's a really famous quote in design. The best design is something that you don't see. It's, it's good design, but you don't see it and it's not getting in your way. I think a lot of times people just throw, especially in healthcare, you just throw everything on the wall and at the person. So what I would, when it comes to those kind of design decisions, in a perfect world, let's say if you're making a clinical workflow, you want to shadow those people and see how they're working and have them design the work, not physically design it, but like you watching them, that should go into your design. I think what a lot of times happens is you design this really cool product. You think that everyone's going to understand it because you understand it, but you also designed the product. So obviously you know how to use it, right? And then when it gets to the end user, they're like, they're clicking on random buttons, they're trying to find this, like, oh, you're like, oh my god, it's in this menu, and they're like blaming them, saying, oh, they're just too dumb, they can't understand this. No, it's the other way around. You're the problem. Your team was the problem because you didn't take in their experiences or what they wanted or how their workflow works. And that happens quite a bit in healthcare specifically, is like there's just nothing is built to workflows that are actually used. They're just built to arbitrary things that I don't even know how sometimes they get some of these design decisions get through.
Well, you know, it's so interesting because you look at like UI, UX, like designing principles, and then you look at different segments of what you're designing. So, for example, let's talk about like a nav bar. You know, everybody has like a navigation bar. If you're looking at Facebook or Instagram on your mobile, you see that the navigation bar is at the bottom, you know, of the individual screen. And you've got some other like elements that if you go from a mobile to a desktop, they're in different locations. And the way that you design those and the simplicity of those, and do you use hamburgers, do you use extensions, do you collapse, you know, all of those kind of elements is really fascinating if you just build it by yourself. You just think, how would I get to
Yeah.
this? Or how would I make it simple without being able to review how would other people do it and how would they flow through the system to get to where they want to go based on the tasks that they're being delegated. And so I think that's another interesting element there is understanding governance early on in the process, that you're going to have different user types and different personas. And so when you're interviewing to look at your design, a really important element right there is you can't just go, if you're, let's say you're designing something you're going to use in a oncology clinic. You can't just go to all the oncologists and ask them, hey, how do you want this to look? You know, and how do you want it built? Because they're going to have a very particular way that they're going to want things to be done. They're going to have a task flow of how they're going to want each step to work. But if you don't ask their medical assistants, their nurses, the pharmacists or pharmacy technicians on their team, those are a bunch of other processes they're also going to have to touch. And you have to understand those individual workflows and how you can start the customization element, Zain, that you and I are so used to seeing now in all of design is let's design it so it's better for the user, like the individual user is something that I feel like we too often just put buckets out there and don't allow for design that way. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, a couple of things. So one thing about designing something is if you look at majority of the apps you use, the general workflow is the same. And that's by design. I'm saying design, but that's by design because it's familiar to the end user, right? You know, if you look at Google Maps, Apple, like all these different companies, they're creating kind of similar apps or even apps that are not the same. The navigation through that app is very similar, and that's done by design because it's one less thing that the user has to do. You're taking away a barrier for them to use the app. So one thing I think a lot of people fall into is, oh, I want to make something different. No, sometimes just use what's out there and use the workflows because there's a reason why so many these billion-dollar, in some cases trillion-dollar companies are designing their stuff the way they are, right? So that's one thing. The second thing about the user personas, I think that's also really important, is identifying your personas. Personas meaning who are the people using this and putting them in buckets, like you mentioned a couple, like, you know, you're the physician, the MA, the nurse, the pharmacist, the front desk person. Who are you designing this for, right? You can't design for everyone, right? Even if everyone is using it, who are the people that are going to be using it the most, right? You know, maybe the physician is only using it 10% of the times, but the front desk person is using it 80% of the times, and the nurse is also using it. Like, so you need to skew more towards their end, right? Yeah, I mean, the physician might get angry a little bit, but 10% versus 80% is a big difference, right? If those people are not happy with it, your app is dead. It just is. So that's the other thing, is just like segmenting out your personas accurately. And then once you've segmented out, make sure you talk to all of them and make sure you get their perspective on user flows and stuff. And, you know, you don't have to create something crazy or anything like that. It can just be wireframes on a thing, you know, like cut some paper out and just start moving things around. Be like, okay, you push this button, this window pops up. Like, it can be as simple as that. You don't have to make it complicated. You don't have to go into Figma and create all these crazy like interactions and such. Just grab a pencil, grab a paper, and just start sketching. And that is honestly probably good enough for most people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. And oftentimes when I've been New EHRs are coming in, and a physician or a nursing team wants to tell me, hey, Kevin, I want it to look like this and work like this. Then you have to go back to the EHR group or whoever the consultant is and say, hey, we want it to work like this. How do we change the flow so that it can go something like this and the visibility and views can be changed? And usually the bandwidth of how much can be changed, pretty limited when you're working with large companies like that you can only delegate so many tasks like differentials in certain ways. But the one fun thing about, building something from scratch or continuing to iterate on it is that you have a design step and then you have a usability step that we have to kind of go through. So to jump into that, Zane, with our personas and kind of working through how do you do a good user interview? And I pulled up the sheet here. I'll read through some of it and then tell me kind of what your thoughts are or your experiences inside of it. So like conducting user interviews, like the first thing right off the bat that everybody needs to pull out, and I'm skipping their first step, is do not bias it. I'm going to repeat that. Do not bias it. So when it comes to bias, like you can put bias in a couple of different ways. One, you can formulate questions so that they have a lean toward the answer that you want. Or two, you can make the interview, like settings, circumstances, etc., lean toward the narrative that you want it to have. And then the third one, to be actually probably the most cognizant of, you can lead the interview too far, right? You can avoid the individual from giving their own inputs. So that's the first one I want to start with, Zane. Your thoughts there on how to avoid that bias element when we're getting feedback?
Yeah, I think don't make your questions wordy. Just make them straight to the point, yes or no. You can ask like for opinions, and also it's also really important that you're asking all users the same questions at least. I mean, things might obviously in a conversation as things are moving around, you'll kind of move. I'm not saying like, okay, just run down a list of things, try to make it conversational, but try to hit the same questions for everyone, because then you kind of have a baseline to judge everyone on. Like you find like, okay, this persona, when they're answering these questions, they're saying this persona, when they're asking these questions, they're saying this, right? So that's one thing. And the bias thing is, it's hard. Honestly, it's really easy to say like, don't bias it. It's really difficult. That's why user interviews are so tricky. There's very few people that are really good at it. Another way you can do it is just sending it like a poll where you're not really, you're not asking the questions. You just send it to them in a survey. It's not as effective because it might not get filled as much. Face to face is better. And another way you can also do it is, I mean, this is a little bit later in the stage of it. I mean, I'm probably skipping way ahead. But when you have your product out or an MVP out or a POC, proof of concept out there, just sit down and shut up. Just be like, use this. Don't say anything. Just use it. Watch them. Don't cringe and don't try to do anything. You are not the product. That's the one thing. That another thing we have to remember is we aren't the product. It's okay if they're hating on your product or don't like it. It's not a reflection of you. And that's another thing that I think that me personally had to come to grips with is, oh man, screw these people. Like they hate this, they hate that. No, it's not. They just don't like the product. It's okay. They're not attacking you personally.
Have you seen, Zane, there's like a graphic that it shows like a designer, like a picture in picture, shows the designer's face, like looking down at a user trying to have, there's 3 holes. I think there's one that's a square, one that's a circle, and they're trying to put blocks in there. And then the user comes to the circle hole with the circle about to put it in, and then changes and flips the circle sideways and puts it in the square. And you see the designer go, oh no. But that's exactly what you want. Like you want to see where those mistakes are being made or how they can be made. So I love that you start with that. I think the one thing that's important is you got to set a goal. And that's one thing, like in previous experiences, ours have usually been rather exploratory that I went into rather than having like specific goals and information to get back from, like the overall overarching goal has been more like, what is the user experience like? Where are the pitfalls in like navigation and flow? What additional features are necessary or required? What's the visibility? Like all of those things have been just kind of broad or overarching. But, this breakdown kind of gives a couple fun things like, why do 64% of your existing customers refuse to upgrade their plan to a paid version, right? And so getting to like those specific questions and not asking that exact question, but in a roundabout way, finding out exactly what you said before. What are you paying for, in general? And would you pay for this? If not, why? Those types of questions. The find and recruit participants I wanted to jump to because I know you and I both care about this pretty deeply. Um, Oftentimes, like if we're trying to see like who are the participants in pollings, a couple pieces of advice that they give I love. So, for example, if your product is geared toward helping women or your product is geared toward helping the elderly, like you having interviews with those individuals that are not women or are not elderly is not going to help your product to become better for that user type. Just as Zane described on saying, your primary user is going to be your nurse or your MA, so you really want to, cater toward their needs. So I think that's great. But the one thing I feel like is a failing is we often go, hey, we need 5 to 10 people or we need 20 people to be able to interview. I mean, that's a big number, 5 to 10 individuals to interview. Let's just grab them. Let's just throw a random blast out on social media or grab a friends and family piece. And we just don't get the level of diversity that I'm really hoping to see because I feel like the impact is often understated how culture, religion play a big role, ethnicity, race. Like we can go through the entire kind of gamut and social determinants of health as well, but they play a big role in the way we perceive individual products and their usability. And the same thing with education level. So anyway, without me going further into that, Zane, how do you think we could do a better job of that piece right there?
I mean, it's hard. It's easy. It's hard to find users. There's a lot. I mean, like bigger companies, that's why they pay people to kind of surveys and things like that. Um, in a perfect world, yes, you would have a very diverse population, and it should be that way. I think with the advent of the internet, it's getting better. There's also companies that you can sign up with, and they will help you do your user testing because they can blast it out to a bigger audience. You can tell them exactly what you're looking for. So I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are companies that will also do that too. So like if you're having trouble with that, those are other resources that you can look out for as well. I mean, they're not free, but it's still, a little bit of upfront cost can save you hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars later on. And it's really important, especially in the beginning, that you have a good foothold, especially because you really only get one shot at things. You don't get multiple things. But to answer your question, yes, to have a diverse population, that's key, because you can, like you said, there's a lot of different differentiation, but it's also goes back to you have to really be pointed with who your population is and who you're trying to target. Like if you don't have your target audience figured out, you're going to be just grasping at straws all the time. And if you have your target audience figured out, I shouldn't say it gets easier, but at least you know who to reach out to rather than just kind of spray shot and then hope for the best. Because if you reach out to the right people that are having this problem, that are experiencing it, they're more likely to try to help you versus, 20 random people.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. I mean, you can look at the adoption curve, I think, to be able to kind of gear your mind toward that and see like who do you think are going to be that 10% of like early adopters or innovators and who's going to be that next 20% of early adopters, in that kind of phase. And you can grab those individuals that would likely be close to your original customers or those to use it. The next piece they jump into here, Zane, is really looking at like best practices in the interview itself. So I'll plug through a couple of these and you tell me what you think or what they missed. And so the couple at the bottom here that they kind of write out are ones that we've already talked about, like make notes about how the user responds as well as what they say. So both like visual and being able to watch them, as you kind of identified, sending out a poll or a survey, you can't get that same level of detail. And that's why it's important to note it so that you can also see like how do they respond through looking at your application or looking at your program or whatever you're dealing with and how they see things. Another one is prepare more questions than you think you'll have time to ask. Reason is, some people are going to be very short. And one thing that Zane talked about that I hope everybody kind of heard was sometimes the flow of questions is not going to go, I'm going to ask 1 through 10. It should be more algorithmic. So for example, if someone responds this way, then what's the next question in line, related to it? So that's what they talk about there. Avoid the leading questions and vague questions or closed, like yes, no questions. And now getting back to the ones that I think you and I can kind of delve into a little bit. Make the user feel comfortable, Zane. Have you done a few? I mean, because the ones that I've done, they can be a little uncomfortable, even for folks I know, to come into the interviewing process. Like literally, I've interviewed Savannah before for a couple things, and I've had my colleagues interview her, and like it can be slightly awkward because you know that you're judging someone you love's product, right? And so, how have you helped with that, Zane? Or what do you think we can do to help keep the users comfortable during the interview process so they can be open and honest?
I think just setting the table in the beginning, there's no like, this is just to help us. I think we do this in healthcare too, right? When we're as a pharmacist, and I'm sure you've done it too, the teach back method, where you're teaching somebody something, and you want them not to feel bad about if they don't understand something. So I always used to say like, hey, just so I know I did my job properly, can you please repeat what I said? And most of the times it gets a chuckle, and it kind of takes the burden off of them, right? It's kind of doing the same thing as like, hey, I just want to make sure I'm doing my job properly because this product is meant to help you, not me. We're trying to help you. So, please let us know how we can make it better. Right. And I think that kind of starting that off in the beginning, because like a lot of times I've been through user interviews and they'll just like, hey, how's it going? Have you used the product? Yes or no? And then they just boom, just go into it. And it's just like this slap across the face, like intense, like you're just like, what just happened? Right. And there's no like setting the thing. So that's how I generally like to do it, is like, hey, we're here to help you guys out. And we're trying to build something that you will use and like to use and come back to us. So we want to make sure that we're doing our job properly. And I think that more people are more likely to be like, okay, cool. This person is actually coming for help. And I think most people want to help others. So that's just anecdotal from my standpoint. I could be way off base, but that's just what works for me.
Yeah, I think that the folks that I've worked with that have done really good user interviews have been very appreciative right up front of just saying like, we're so thankful that you're doing this for us. Like, it's extremely valuable. Like, your particular insights, not what you think we want to hear, but just hearing directly from you is big. The other thing that I think, looking in retrospect, I would do for future interviews is sometimes it takes just a little bit of time for that interviewee to get comfortable. And so being able to have some icebreaker questions and some kind of easy, like knock them off the tee kind of elements are really nice to plug in the beginning so that you don't have to go back and ask questions that you think they may have hesitated on or not given you a full answer until they kind of warmed up to the interviewing process. And so those are a couple others that I would just plug in at the end there. When it comes to like using the software, here's another thing, Zane, that I feel like is just so important and a really handy thing. When you're doing the interview, think about how you are going to watch and how you're going to record the individual, right? So you can actually see the screen, help them with the screen, and make it simplistic. Because you mentioned Figma before, and that was actually a really handy tool in the process to be able to do a screen and screen and view it, or to use something like a Google Meet and then be able to share a cell phone, to showcase it on another screen. So if you're doing remote interviews, that everybody, part of the interviewing panel and the interviewee, can be able to see what everyone is talking about and experience the same thing together. Any additional thoughts there, Zane, on being able to have those screen sharing, recordings, capturing images, all that good stuff?
Yeah, the number one thing when you're doing those kind of things, that you have to kind of go in with, okay, what is the point of this? Are we here to help them and discuss what's going on, or are we just sitting back and watching them struggle? Right? It might be hard to do, but those are two different types, right? And you can't really, maybe you can do both. Maybe you start with them struggling, and after some time, you're like, okay, this is here. But I think you just have to kind of decide what the purpose of that is first. I think you get a lot. Me personally, I think you get a lot by just sitting down and watching them and not saying a word, just writing down your observations, or you can just record it, because you really get to see where are they going first, right? Because you're like, okay, you think they're going to go to B, they're going to A and C, and they're not even looking at B. Okay, well, that's weird. We thought that was going to be it. So like, I think I get a little bit more out of that than, especially like in this stage, right? Because you are really trying to hammer it down. And then, later on you can be like, hey, this is here, this is there. You can't always have a perfect product where everyone's going to understand how to use it. There is going to be a level of, you're going to have to, that's why they have tutorials and all these walkthroughs for almost every single software. But if you're seeing a lot of people doing the same actions, then okay, we probably need to move that button, or take this from the menu and put it out more in the front.
Yeah, I think there's a couple, I guess, just little notes that I would add on there from experience. It's really nice to have software that is able to record where touches or
Mhm.
clicks happen, and then be able to see where do users go and where does the journey kind of end or get stymied in their overall user experience. Like that's huge for overall feedback to all the teams. And the other piece that I really like to plug in here is have scenarios. Like just don't throw it to them and say, here you go ahead and use it and do all the things that it's capable of. Like you're not going to have a really clear picture of what someone is struggling with, as opposed to asking like, hey, here's a task, or here's a like a dummy task that's put in place, or we wanted you to get this information or see what your thoughts were on the way this was presented. And then you are able to show them like, here's the starting point. Can you do this for me? And then, or can you do this on this app for you? And have them kind of walk through that journey, I think can add a ton of value back, and being able to capture, like, because you can't just take everything and swallow it. It's an ocean, like an interview is. And so if you can start breaking things down to these modals or this feature or whatever the case is in a not so nuanced, targeted way, but making it feel more like a story or a scenario, it can be really helpful. But that's
Yeah.
all for anybody on that side. Any other parting words? I mean, we got
No, I
30.
mean this. I mean, we could literally talk about this for so long. And if people are like, "Man, that's a lot of work," well, building a good product is a lot of work. There's a reason why um, a lot of products fall by the wayside is because this is the kind of stuff that needs to get done, but a lot of times is just skipped because it's too boring or too much work or whatever. But like this is the stuff that is probably more valuable than your initial idea, because this is what is going to teach you like, oh, okay, maybe we can pivot. Can we do this now? Can we not do this now? Oh man, we didn't even think about this. Maybe we need to add that in. This could be the difference between you having a product people will pay for versus just try out.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll throw in there is this exact same process that we're describing and the way that we're describing it, it doesn't just have to apply to health tech companies and digital apps. I mean, if you're doing a new program or a new service inside of your facility, you're doing a policy and procedure, you're asking your nursing staff or providers or pharmacists to do something or to change the way they're doing something, these steps can be really essential to making sure that that can actually be done, and there's not unforeseen roadblocks in the way of them being successful in doing it. And the exact same thing to patient populations. If you want them to take advantage of a service in your that's for your community inside of your facility, same pieces. Asking those good interview questions, making sure they feel comfortable and they can be successful with those programs is a big part and step in success. All right,
100%.
man. Well, so much fun. Hope you guys all had fun. Thanks for everybody that was watching there. Really appreciate it. Join Zane and I next week for another exciting episode. Head over to rphally.com and join it. Join Zane's Healthcare Tech Show and make sure that you take in all of his digital thoughts.
Bye, guys.
All right, guys.